Later. This next panel is titled Growing Place at the Intersection of Art, Business, and Community. Creative placemaking is a hot topic in funding and planning circles that brings artists, designers, planners, businesses, and community together to an energized place. Whether that framework is fully embraced, the work is happening in many different sectors of our city. Hearing from multiple perspectives, the session will pose some examples of how art, design, and community come together toward building a more vibrant Houston. Our responders today, and I'll start from Diane in the center, I suppose, is Diane Schenke, president of the Greater East End Management District and a longtime East End advocate. Did I get that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Right next to her is Jon Deal, a local developer who has experience working with artists and arts cultural organizations. And then Laurel, who serves as the associate director at Voices Breaking Boundaries and the managing editor for their publications. Our presenter, who will be speaking, Susan Rogers, is the founder and director of the Community Design Resource Center at the University of Houston's College of Architecture, where she is also assistant professor. She is an educator and practicing community designer and planner. Her research, teaching, and practice focus on design as a strategy for community change, exploring the seams between design, equity, and the public interest. The CDRC, founded in 2005, has partnered with dozens of community-based and nonprofit organizations across the city of Houston as a means to develop collaborative and pragmatic solutions to the challenges facing the city. Please welcome them. Yeah, we turn this on here. This looks like it's on. We're on? It's on. So, here we go. I will get out of here. I'm going to get out of your way.
Sure. So thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here today. I think I'm kind of an outlier. My training is in architecture, city planning, and community development. But I started my interest in the relationship between the arts and place began more than 20 years ago when I started working with Mecca. And so I want to talk today really about the relationship between arts and place. I think clearly the arts have been recognized for their role, thank you, in growing place. Prior to official legislation that established community development corporations or legislation that established the National Endowment for the Arts. Today we know that the arts play a critical role in community development. They enhance a sense of community, they encourage participation, promote cultural identity, and are an important means of both political and social expression. But should we also expect the arts, if you will, to attract tourists, to increase our tax base, and to revitalize our communities? I hope this is a question that we can explore. And should the arts be considered something that enhances a place, making it more vibrant, or instead considered more as integral to that place, the people who live there? In other words, arts that grow from a place. So over the last 150 years, the role of the arts in nurturing and growing place and in human development has been continuously redefined depending on the social, political, and economic priorities of our society. 5 movements, I'm going to try to cover 5 movements or eras, that highlight the progression of the arts as a tool to build place and in the broader support of people and communities. I've tried to track the emphasis of each program because it has shifted from an emphasis on people to an emphasis on place to an emphasis on things that are external to the arts, like economic development and tourism, to try to get a sense of where we've been and where we might be going in the future. I don't know. I don't seem to be changing anything.
He won't quote you on
Thank you. No, right. So I want to start with the settlement house movement that began in the 1880s and was really the first kind of moment in time where the arts were recognized as a tool to kind of, particularly democratizing access to the arts, was recognized as a tool to kind of build and grow both people and communities. So, but the major purpose was to assimilate and ease the transition of immigrants into the labor force by teaching them middle-class American values. And so the goal also, though, was to expand exposure to the arts, particularly to communities that were isolated from elite cultural activities. So, but this was a period in the U.S. Where we had very great immigration to the country and both kind of the vast expansion of our cities. The programs were funded privately. Most were run by women from wealthy backgrounds. But it's an important point and kind of the first step, if you will, in recognizing the arts kind of as a tool, if you will, for kind of bigger things. So Jane Addams' Hull House in Chicago, which was established in 1889, is the most famous, if you will, of the settlement houses. Hull House helped to educate immigrants by providing classes in history, art, and literature. Hull House also provided social services to reduce the effects of poverty, including a daycare center, homeless shelter, public kitchen, and public baths. But settlement houses can also be connected to the kind of design, architecture, and planning movement called City Beautiful. This was a movement that advocated for civic art, public space, and public parks that they considered kind of mechanisms, if you were, to encourage kind of proper and middle-class behavior. In other words, these things kind of as a means to kind of assimilate people into greater society. The idea that civic beauty would transfer the moral condition of society is an idea that I think we are seeing again in contemporary times. Oops, wait, I'm sorry, boy. Somebody should have given me a heads up about that. I'm having a difficult time. So this is NCI, Baker Ripley House in Gulfton. NCI was born out of the settlement house movement. The first one was in the East End, and it was opened in the early 1900s. So the 1930s are the second period I want to talk about, with the Great Depression and the unemployment and other things that kind of brought on great suffering during that time. FDR established the New Deal. The Federal Artists Project of the Works Progress Administration provided employment for thousands of artists who were out of work, and this included employment opportunities for artists, writers, playwrights, and others. It's very sensitive, I'm sorry. Over 20,000 artists were employed in this program by 1938 in the visual, literary, and performing arts. The program was the first federally sponsored arts program in the United States that recognized and promoted the needs of artists as workers and the role of art in society. During the life of the Federal Artists Project, musicians performed 225,000 concerts for 150 million people. About 500,000 works of art, which still decorate post offices, courthouses, and other public buildings, were produced. Diego Rivera's famous murals in the Detroit Institute of Art were part of this program. But also the work of the Photography Project, photographers, including Dorothea Lange, in a program to introduce America to Americans, where photographers were sent into rural America to document the conditions there. So the third movement I want to talk about is the Civil Rights Movement in CIPA, which is the Comprehensive Employment and Training Act. In the 1960s, the arts became integral to the political, cultural, and social movements of the time, particularly following the Civil Rights Movement. A citizen-based activism emerged that challenged the historical constructs of power and actively promoted and produced a new set of cultural representations. Art was a primary force. During this period, the range of federal funding and support for community art activities and community development reached levels unparalleled previously, and the arts became largely recognized not only as a tool for cultural expression, but also for political and social inquiry and community organizing. Art activities were sustained through so many programs, including the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, the Community Development Act of 1968, the Public Broadcasting Act, the Office of Economic Opportunity, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and the National Foundation for the Arts and Humanities, which established the National Endowment for the Arts. In the 1970s, the Department of Labor's Comprehensive Employment and Training Act provided funding for artists, cultural products, and arts training. The legislation provided for the largest artist employment program since the Federal Artist Project of the Works Progress Administration, meaning this program employed more people than the WPA. And was incredibly important, particularly in the 1970s. Old Sixth Ward Park by Mecca was completed in part through CIPA funds. I'm going to start saying next, okay? No. CIPA was discontinued in 1982 under the Reagan administration as we turned to the public-private partnership for solutions to development and community change. And really, this is when we began the kind of neoliberal turn, meaning kind of basically the unraveling, if you will, of the social safety net. So the fourth period I want to talk about is the 1990s and the emergence of this idea that the arts and community development should be married and they should be together. The tide was already turning further towards this kind of market shift, if you will, both in the arts and community development. Community development was being measured simply in bricks and mortar terms, meaning how many houses did you produce, how many square feet of retail. And even though the arts were becoming increasingly valued as integral to community and youth development, federal funding streams were not increased. But the real estate development approach and push towards privatization had largely displaced political advocacy, empowerment, organizing, and the social initiatives of arts and community-based organizations. And so I think one of our favorite organizations in the city, Project Row House, was started during this era. But because one of the things that was happening is there was also a counter movement, particularly in the foundation community, to return to a comprehensive approach to community development that included the arts and cultural programs. This was based on increasingly strong evidence that bricks and mortar were simply not enough. And in fact, bricks and mortar alone largely lead to gentrification to really change the conditions in struggling communities. So the NEAKC Foundation, CERDNA, and Ford all funded comprehensive community development initiatives in this era. The goal was to create kind of a unified partnership and comprehensive change that included kind of programs for youth, families, and communities to really try to basically create comprehensive community change. And I'm out of time, so I'm going to be really quick. So today, the arts and their relationship to community and urban development have become increasingly known as creative placemaking. There is a significant historical link that ties together creative placemaking both as an idea and as a funding stream to the political shifts that began in the 1970s and to the civic and moral reform of the 1880s. Specifically, the pressure to depend on the public-private partnership and the notion that beautiful places will transform community conditions. The public-private partnership is in evidence in programs such as the NEA's Our Town program, which was developed in the middle of the recession, and where funding goes to a municipality or government organization and must demonstrate partnerships across both public and private agencies. A similar requirement exists in the Choice Neighborhoods program from HUD that funds the redevelopment of former public housing. So second, there's an increased push to measure the impacts of investments in the arts and community development. In other words, being able to illustrate and count the value of the efforts within the framework of the market, to be able to illustrate the economic value. In many ways, creative placemaking might be directly connected to all of the work that has been done to quantify the arts, to identify and track the creative class, and to give cities one more tool by which they can measure their world-classness. But maybe there's another way we could think about things to push back towards a comprehensive approach to change, finding new ways to be grounded and engaged, and looking for opportunities and assets everywhere. I think we could learn something from the New York City Department of Transportation art program, which basically has identified 5 or 6 conditions and said, go ahead and make a proposal. We'll fund it, you make it work. It's a great program to just open up opportunities. I know Minette Basil is here. We worked on a project in Magnolia Park called the Zona de Juego, where we tried to test this idea of what you could do with very little. So national and societal priorities shape the policies that shape our world. Within this framework, our priorities shape the funding streams that at any given time determine the type and amount of funding available for the arts and for community development, the types of programs and services that will be funded, and the balance between social and economic priorities. It is the balance between social and economic priorities that I think we need to be concerned about, as increasingly artists and cultural workers are forced to argue that their work will have an economic impact on the city or draw tourists or otherwise support the bottom line. If we could think of the bottom line as the lives of our citizens instead of a number of dollars, we might in fact impact economics through the back door, but dollar value cannot be the measure of the work alone. The work has much deeper and more meaningful impacts, and this has been proven over and over in study after study. It is time to put the arts back in the hands of people, in our schools, in our parks, in our communities, in our minds. And we have to ensure that the arts do not become subservient to the market economy and the real estate deal. It's just more meaningful than that.
They are Diane? I'm sorry.
Be careful with it. I will be careful with it. Although I'm not very good with being careful. Over there, huh? Can you load it? There we go. Well, if Susan is an unusual person to be talking to you, I'm even more so because I'm the president of a management district. And management districts are charged with making an area a better place to do business. Did this just stop? We were going, weren't we? I think, there we go. So we're in charge of a 16 square mile area just due east of downtown, and you can see from the pictures that are on the slide the type of area that I represent. All right, we're going to tilt this a little bit more. There are 80,000 residents within that 16 square mile area. There's also over 3,500 businesses. We're undergoing a major shift in that area as a lot of, this is, in and out. Why don't we try another microphone? As business, maybe I ought to just stand up, huh? All right, we'll try again, guys. As businesses are leaving the East End, so we've got lots of empty acreage to fill. We also have a new light rail that, knock on wood, will open within a month. So there are many changes coming to the East End, as well as a proximity to downtown. We've got 2 major bayous that go through the area with Buffalo Bayou and Brays Bayou. I tell you what, I'm just going to stand up, guys. Because this one seems to work all the time. So, you know, what we have tried to do in working on this area, it's an old area, it's a historic area. It's always been the immigrant area for people to move into as they've come to Houston. It started, 200 years ago. There were Germans, Poles, Romanians, Bulgarians. In fact, commerce used to be German Drive before World War I, when it was renamed. It's now 90% Hispanic. So how do we start redeveloping an area to welcome another wave of newcomers? We've got lots of empty land as the industries move out. We've got a new light rail coming in, but we want to continue to honor the history that's there and the residents that are currently there. You see up there the light rail. Let's see. I'm not even going to try to show you, but the East End light rail is totally within the management district and goes directly into downtown, which then connects with the Main Street rail going into the medical center. So that all total is about 250,000 jobs. I met somebody over the weekend that we were working the Bayou Greenway Trail Day, and he said he had come because he couldn't afford to move into the Heights or move into Montrose. So we're seeing lots of new residents move into the neighborhoods that are there. So our approach to art was to incorporate it into all of the work that we're funding. We've got 64 miles of sidewalks, another 15 miles of bike trails and bikeways. And you can see the map that's up here. On the bottom portion is the light rail. We've got various bisecting streets that are the major busways in there. On the upper corner is navigation, and if you've never been to the East End, you've probably been to Nympha's. So there are a variety of plazas, parks for people to stop along the way. There's been a major effort to connect all the existing trails, whether they're along Buffalo Bayou, the Columbia Tap Trail, hooking into all of these trails that are throughout town. One of the major efforts of the city through a grant that was obtained about 2 years ago is to make all of these trails connect, so you can get on your bike along White Oak and come over to the East End, or start in the East End and go down to McGregor Park, or go on over to Herman Park. So this is a major shift in thinking for the city, and it's a major shift in thinking for all of us Houstonian bicycle riders that may not be as intrepid as some of our early cyclists. But what we have done is what we're calling functional art. And this was with, whoops, I think I skipped over one. This was with the help of the Houston Arts Alliance. And of course, you can order things like bicycle racks and benches and street lights out of a catalog, but you can also use these as a way to tell somebody about your neighborhood. And we have now received over $29 million in grants, and this is about 8 or 9 different grants, most of them federal grants. But we have used this same language for all of the street furniture, the lighting, and what we did is work with the art guys, who then went out and hired artists, and we developed benches that have Half of them are in English, half of them are in Spanish. I had one irate lady call me and suggest that they should have been in German because everybody knew it had been a German neighborhood once upon a time. But they all suggest patience, because typically you're waiting at a bus stop if you're sitting on one of those benches. But it also suggests patience because the neighborhood itself is changing. So there are things like just smile, keep on, but one of my favorites in front of Champburger, and it says just smile, and people typically are smiling because they're waiting for some of the best hamburgers in town. The bicycle racks are in Spanglish, and I don't know if you remember, but there was an article by Lisa Falkenberg about, is this a good art use or not to have Spanglish bicycle racks? So like any public art that attempts to make comments about the neighborhood, you get into all sorts of comments and questions. We went out for public comment. We had people voting on what they wanted to have these say. We received like 400 votes, but still, once these get put out on the street corners and people see them, there's all sorts of comments, and like, when were you doing this? How did people have an opportunity for comments? So it would have been easier to just order them out of a catalog and not try to do anything special. But people liked it well enough that, and I don't know if you can see this, it's sort of washed out. We are using these benches to name a garden that's for pollinators along Harrisburg and Lockwood. The people that have endowed it wanted it to say Jenkins Garden so folks riding by on the East End Light Rail could read it. Finally, we're creating a cultural district, and like everything else in Texas, cultural districts are there to promote tourism. But again, we're using it to promote our historical assets, to promote our restaurants, to promote all of our venues, so that the various venues that we've got in the East End can all come together and talk about the fact that they're located in one area and they're doing something on one day. And as of February 1st, the Cultural District and East End Foundation have a director, Diane Barber. Diane, there we go. On May 17th, we'll have a Sunday Streets along Navigation, and Diane is putting together an open house for the Cultural District. So come to Sunday Streets along Navigation and come check out the Cultural District in the East End.
Well, if Diane and Susan were unusual candidates for this, I would have been voted least likely. So when Sixto cornered me at the event for the mayor, who was being honored for a national award on the local arts leadership, I thought I was volunteering for more of a roundtable type discussion. And in either event, here I am, and we'll work our way through this. But a lot of what Diane was saying, kind of follows something I've heard developers say time and again, which is follow the artist. Art tends to pave the way for these redevelopment processes, and the East End has had several kickstarts at moving forward in a redevelopment process, and I think the effort at hand is going to lead the way on a full-fledged redevelopment. So congratulations on that. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Jon Deal. I'm a developer or redeveloper of sorts. We typically buy land with an improvement on it and work towards the redevelopment of that improvement. Initially, I started out in apartment redevelopments and worked my way into redeveloping old buildings, and started with the Winter Street Studios building in 2004. Winter Street Studios had a long history of being utilized for art studios, but kind of under the radar, not code approved, not well designed, and not open to the public. And so we grabbed a hold of it in 2004, and were fortunate enough to bring it above board, get permitted for art studios, and kind of legitimize the art program in the city of Houston. We followed that with Spring Street Studios, then Silver Street Studios, and now we're working on the silos on Sawyer. And currently we have 220 working artists in our 3 buildings, and upon completion of the 4th, we should have just over 300 working artists, which I think by all accounts would be the largest concentration of working artists in the state of Texas. And likely we rank pretty high nationally in that category. In our process of establishing and branding the market area, we've been able to achieve a cultural district designation from the state, which should allow us to further brand and market and put on art-related events, and really establish a goal of creating destination, which has been on my mind since the very beginning. In 2004, when I picked up on Winter Street Studios, I felt like this area was one of the last great areas to create a working art studio district. And although it moved along at a relatively slow pace, it seemed to pick up steam after I completed the Spring Street Studios building. Some of the other developers in the neighborhood picked up on my efforts, and we've joined forces. In fact, I partnered with Steve Gibson and Paul Hobby on the Silver Street Studios redevelopment process. And subsequent thereto, Frank Liu has kind of joined the effort, and combined, the 3 of us own a fairly substantial amount of acreage that we're currently master planning for what we're calling a creative campus. And those efforts are, my focus is kind of on the white box art studio, whereas Frank is going to gear more towards complementary commercial and retail type developments that will fit in a creative campus type environment. In looking at this thing, a long-term vision on everybody's part is critical, because if we looked at these as short-term investments, land plays, to flip at some certain point, it would be hard to focus on this community building, which we've done. And the community building effort is not just at the developer level, but it's necessary at the artist level. It's critical that they come together as a well-defined, unified group in order to further their cause. These synergies that come about, create the path for events and marketing and branding on their own without the help of the developer. And we've seen a lot of that happen over the years at Winter and now Spring and Silver. Sixto wanted me to touch on a couple of topics, and one was the economics of our redevelopments. And by most standards, what we do is certainly not the highest and best use of the land. As I mentioned, we buy in at land value and effectively end up with an improvement for free. And so the challenge is to find out, what is the best way to realize a positive economic scenario where we can redevelop the improvements, save an old building, and add to the cultural value of the city, which we've done time and time again. Although land values are getting to a point where it's really difficult to make these projects financially feasible. And so, the next step may be a public-private type relationship. But, we're discussing aspects of that as well to further the cause. Lastly, I think he wanted me to touch on, let's see here, sorry about that. I put this together shortly before coming in here, and then I took notes as I was sitting at the table, as you guys could